if there's anyone there.
So, preparing to live stream the meeting. Apparently we're now live. So I'm Sorrel Pindar, and I'm here with my colleague John Britton. We've just talked to you today about something we've got coming up next week and something we get coming up starting in April. And I wanted to start off with a story, because something happened this morning that I realised something that I haven't realised before, which is why it is I'm so averse to going on Facebook and LinkedIn to do lives. And because I'm very happy to sit in a networking meeting and actually pretend to be dancing to Stevie Wonder, which is kind of weird. But when the thought of going live on Facebook or LinkedIn just kind of fills me with dread. And then I thought, so why is that? And it occurred to me, it's a bit like being back at school. And when you're back in school, well, I was a very clever little girl. I was actually quite afraid to put my hand up and speak in class. So I guess it reminds me a bit of that. And so John and I are going to be talking today about this whole kind of approach to how we deal with stuff from the past in the present. But before we go on to talk about that, I'd like to hand over to John, who's also going to introduce himself. I didn't introduce myself at all, did I? I'm a coach, and I'm a boarding school survivor. And I'm clearly not very well organised when it comes to doing lives. And now I'm going to hand over to John.
Well, I'm not going to claim to be any more organised than that. I'm John. I'm also a coach and a mentor with a background in training performers over the last 30 years, and also boarding school survivor, and someone who actually only realised that the phrase boarding school survivor existed, let alone meant anything, about 2 or 3 years ago. And it was a revelation to me to discover that something which I just thought was how it is, it's the life I had. And I knew it was problematic because, you know, my boarding school experience was suffused with a great deal of bullying and not fitting in. I was not from a rich family particularly, and my dad was a teacher at the school, and it's a toxic brew. Your dad's a teacher, you don't fit in financially, and you're a noisy, creative, strange little boy in a very muscular, religious, rugby playing Methodist school. I didn't have a bloody hope. But it's only a few years ago that I actually realized that it meant anything. And I was just thinking, just as you said, Sorrel, there about dancing to Stevie Wonder, which it's okay. I'm not judging you. I'm not judging you for that, but that's all I'm saying about that. But I remember being in class, and we had a history teacher who was actually my godfather. He was inordinately boring. He would talk for 10 minutes about a topic at the beginning of the class, and then he would dictate notes. The class was literally him giving 3 or 4 words. You'd write them down, 3 or 4 words. So he just dictated notes. And I remember once I had my notebook like this, and I was so bored. I was going, writing in huge letters, all just because I was bored senseless. And he stopped the class and he said, "Britton, we are not here to express ourselves." That was it. That moment, I remember it now, 45 years later, that little moment where boarding school was about crushing what little glimmer of individuality you had. Boarding school said, no, we're not here to be individuals. We are here to conform. I never did quite conform, but it's taken a long time to notice that there may have been damage caused by that sort of incident that I've spent the last 3 or 4 years consciously trying to take to pieces.
Yeah.
So we're going to do some stuff together.
Yeah, we are.
Do you want to talk about next week's initial project?
So we're going to be running a webinar same time next Tuesday, 5 p.m. It'll be British summer time, so it'll be even lighter than it is today. And it's an hour. It's going to be on Zoom, and people are invited to join us on Zoom. And we're going to put a link for that to register in the comments after this is over. And in that webinar, we're going to be looking at this isn't just about boarding school. It's really important to recognise that the same kind of principles apply no matter whether you went to boarding school, or maybe one of your parents passed when you were a child, or, you know, some people have ended up in care, and others, you know, there are all kinds of things that happen to us in childhood. And the kind of basic premise of our work is that as children, we create our own strategies for surviving in whatever circumstance we find ourselves in. And actually, Nick Duffel, who wrote an amazing book about boarding school experience called The Making of Them, which is an interesting title, he talks about the survival personality. So that includes things like mindsets, the way we react to things, our fears, the way we interpret events, and our behavior. And I tend to call these old programs, and I know that John refers to them as paradigms. But we create those as children, and we don't do it consciously. We don't sit down and think, well, I think today I need to be more frightened of being left on my own, so I'm going to be afraid of abandonment. That would clearly, it's not going to happen. That would be nonsense. But it develops unconsciously. And then we discover later in life that something's not quite right. And we don't understand why. And for me, I discovered the notion of boarding school survivorship about 15 or so years ago, I think it was. And when I read Nick Duffel's book, it all made sense. And then as years went by, I started to unpick the things that I was doing in my life that was really sabotaging me and my marriage, and to some extent my relationship with my children, and why that was. And in more recent years, I've started to recreate myself anew, shall we say, and to start to be much more conscious about things and about how I relate to other people and how I relate to myself. And so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're going to be doing next week in the webinar. And we're really hoping that we'll be giving enough value in that 1 hour that people come away with something, but we're going to be leading into something bigger, which John's going to tell you about now.
Yeah, the Nick Duffel book, The Making of Them, was revelatory for me. And I can't remember if it was a Nick Duffel book or the psychologist Joy Shavarian who coined the phrase boarding school syndrome, which is a very powerful book as well. One of them talked about the fact that emotionally, for a child at 8 or 9 or 10 who's sent away to boarding school, they've been ripped from all of their familiar surroundings. They've lost their family pet. They've lost the security of being with their parents. They've lost, their teddy bears and cuddly toys and all the things that make up the cocoon in which a child feels safe, or a child should feel safe. She said the only difference between somebody going to a boarding school and somebody in an orphanage is that the child in the orphanage knows that his parents didn't send him there by choice. That in the boarding school, the child has lost all of that and knows that at some level, their parents chose to send them away. Now, of course, I'm not making comparisons about saying, boarding schools are worse than orphanages. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that was revelatory because it made me understand that when a child is sent to boarding school, or as you say, some other disruption happens in their life, be it the death of a parent, be it, some people whose parents are soldiers and moved, constantly from country to country or whatever, that sort of disruption lays down deep patterns which it can take decades even to notice, let alone begin to decode. So starting next month and running through till July, there will be a 12-week program. It's actually 4 sessions, then a week off, then 3 sessions, then a week off, then 3 more. So it's 12 weeks. And we are going to be working systematically through looking at the past, trying to understand how paradigms or behavior patterns are laid in place, understanding how children learn, understanding a little bit about, what disrupted adolescence creates. So looking at the past, looking at the present, learning to observe ourselves and our patterns in the present, and so become more familiar with the material that we have now and what we can put down from the past. And of course, looking at the future, imagining how we could grow, who we could be if we put down the baggage that we've been carrying, some of us for decades. And of course, I talk through the lens of my disruptions. My disruptions are boarding school, they're bullying, they're a class disruption. My parents were both working class, but grew up in a, desperately trying to fit into a middle class environment. So there's all sorts of disruptions. I talk through that. Sorrel will talk through her disruptions, and the patterns the things that caused her to make unhelpful patterns in her past. And I hope that there will be a range of people in the group who will come in and say, well, actually, I'm not a boarding school person, but I recognize disrupted adolescence from this. And I recognize disrupted adolescence from that. So we can begin to understand what makes each of us different and what it is that we share. One of the most important revelations for me, reading Nick Duffel's book and Joy Shavarian's book and a few others as well, is realizing that although my story is my story, there are elements of it which are shared with many, many, many other people. I am not uniquely damaged. I carry damage from my adolescence. Other people carry damage from their adolescence, and the damage is different but connected. So one of the things that I really want us to do in this 3-month course is hear each other's stories and know that we are not alone. Nobody's going to say, your suffering's bigger or your suffering's less, I was hurt more than you. None of that stuff means anything. What does mean something is to say, bring your experience, share it, be respected for the fact that you have survived, and let's together look at strategies to leave the past behind and start living in the present, and to imagine a future based on who we are, not on who we were trained to be 40 or 50 years ago, or 20 years ago, whatever it is. Yeah. So the 3-month program starts next month and goes on until, I think, the 5th of July is the last session. Yes. And it will be an extremely supportive group for us to grow in. That's what we're here to do. We're here to put down the baggage of the past, live in the present, and set ourselves new pathways towards better and more fulfilling futures.
I would add that we're all capable of doing that.
Absolutely. None of us, all of us feel at times, oh, it's too much, it's too hard. It's less hard if you are held in a supportive group of people who go, I can't understand your particular damage because, we all have our own pain, but I can hold space for you, and I can, understand that all of us in this group are carrying something, and all of us can change, and all of us can put aside the feeling sometimes of being disempowered and instead pick up some baggage full of power and hope and joy and optimism and start to live, the last few years for me, since really beginning to tackle my, the stuff I've been carrying for half a century now, it's about embracing brightness and leaving the darkness behind.
I like that, John. I always talk about living my life in full colour. Whereas before it seemed like it was in shades of grey. And it's been an interesting journey for me. I think one thing I've learned is that we all share the experience of pain. However, the nature of the specificity of the pain is different. So my pain is from everybody else's pain. However, we all share that experience, and we all share the ability to heal from the inside out.
It's interesting. Just one thing, another thing Nick Duffel says in his book, The Making of Them, is many people from boarding school are embarrassed about acknowledging even to themselves they have pain, because we had apparently privilege. Certainly from my parents' perspective, my mother came from abject poverty, and my father from, pretty deep level poverty. They gave me what they could never have imagined would have been possible for them. I mean, my father taught at a boarding school, and he gave me what for him was the best possible start in life. And I feel so ungrateful for looking back and naming that as damage. And it's hard. We go, yeah, but other people suffered more. Or, oh, I didn't have it so bad. None of those things mean anything. You're so right. We have the specificities of our own pain, and we don't have to apologize, even if the pain seems to come from a place that other people would call privileged. I don't think there is anything privileged about a boarding school, except the fact there's money in there,
I mean, I went to a charitable school, and the fees were really low, which is the only way my parents could afford it. And by the time my middle sister was old enough, they were earning too much, and she could not go to the same school as I went to. But the reason I went to boarding school was not because my parents wanted to give me an excellent education. They probably did, but it was because my father was very depressed, and they were concerned about what impact that would have on us as children, as adolescents. And no, it never felt like a privilege. But I also recognise that somebody who went to one of the more kind of privileged schools, if you like, fancy schools, like Winchester, for instance, or Charterhouse, they also have been subjected to the same kind of, I don't want to say the same kind of damage, maybe it's different kind of damage, but it's damage nonetheless. Mm-hmm. And that just because they came from wealthy families and went to a privileged school doesn't mean to say that they have not in some way been damaged, but also people can change and people can recreate themselves anew. Mm. And one of the things that we wanted to say about the webinar is that it's for an hour, so it's free. Our intention is that people leave that webinar feeling that there's some hope, with maybe a different understanding of what's happened for them in their lives and where they are now and what's possible. And for me, the really important thing is to leave with a good feeling, because one of my mentors once said, all we actually have is the feeling. And if it's a good feeling, then that's brilliant. And if it's not such a good feeling, well, that's okay too, because we all go through bad feelings from time to time, and that's inevitable. And there can still be a good feeling about the fact that, okay, I'm going through something that feels bad, but I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. And there will be people who probably leave the webinar with lots of questions, and that's okay too, because John and I will be around to answer questions on, I don't know, LinkedIn or wherever, or Facebook, or so.
All over the place.
All over the place.
And it's true. It's true. If anybody is watching this, or live or on catch up later, and you have questions about the webinar, just send me a direct message or send Sorrel a direct message. This very much feels to me like an offer which is intended as an act of service.
Absolutely.
Things are not easy for people, and this acknowledgement of that the past has created survival strategies that we need to move beyond, and the creation of a space where together we can try to do that is intended very clearly to return to you, anyone who attends, to return to you a sense of agency.
Yes.
That sense that what was taken from you in your disrupted adolescence, whatever the nature of that disruption was, what was taken from you was the secure cocoon from which you could act. You could act because you knew you were safe to take risks. And for many of us, we learned we weren't safe. My boarding school taught me many things, but the most lifelong one so far has been that I'm not safe.
Yeah.
Now, to regain agency, I need to know that I am safe. And one of the things that I feel very passionately about is that people who come to the webinar or perhaps choose to sign up to become part of the 3-month group, that we create a space where they can reconnect with the fact that the dangers that they are defending themselves against no longer exist. Yeah. The dangers that you encountered in your disruptive adolescence, they're gone. The bullies who did make my life hell for 3 years. It was violent, psychologically and physically violent, and it was awful. But those bullies are now respectable accountants and lawyers and teachers all over the country. They're not there anymore. That's where my agency comes from, knowing that the fears are of the past. In the present, I think it's Eckhart Tolle who says, in the present, you don't really have any problems. In this precise moment, you just go, I don't have to defend myself. Nobody's attacking me.
And you know what, John, even when there is something threatening, like 2 lorries driving down either side of you when you're in a little car.
Ooh, horrible.
I had this conversation over the weekend. And yeah, but actually in that situation, I would always say that when we're present, rather than being caught up in lots of thinking, we are safe because we will instinctively know what to do.
Absolutely. Or at least we're as safe as we possibly can be. When we get, to be as safe as you possibly can be, get present.
Yeah, absolutely. Being present is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Present, life is so different. For me, being present means when I go to I love my local cemetery. It's bizarre, isn't it? Now when I go there and I'm much more present, I hear so many birds, different types of birds, and in a way that I never heard them before. So the world has become a much richer place.
Well, as you know, presence is my sort of my obsession. But there it is. There's my latest
John,
book. I happened. Well, no, all right, I'll do it that way. It's absolutely, for me, the source of everything is come back to the present moment. Come back to this thing. See what is actually happening inside and out, and you will make the best possible choices about how to respond. But if you're seeing all that through 30 years ago, that happened to me, or I'm scared that in the future this might happen to me, you're going to make much less effective choices.
Yeah. And I would say the other thing about being present is becoming aware of what you actually have going for you. And most of us don't realize how much we have going for us until we've become present. I like the metaphor of the golden Buddha. Underneath that layer of stucco all that stuff we put on to protect ourselves when we were kids, in fact. Underneath that is this golden Buddha that is timeless and indestructible, and anyway.
Yeah. So let's just the seminar, the webinar. Is it a seminar or a webinar?
It's a webinar, John. We've been calling it a webinar. Let's be consistent.
Yeah, all right. I don't even know. Webinar is a word invented after I was fully mature and I had my degrees. Therefore, I'm suspicious of it. Because, but okay. So we're doing the webinar next Tuesday at 5 o'clock Irish time, because I'm in
Irish time. Yeah, and your British time too.
Yeah, I think Irish time and British time will still be in sync, but if the clocks change, we'll see. But anyway, 5 o'clock UK time next Tuesday, and then the long course, the 3-month course, begins on April the 19th. Are they Tuesday evenings or Wednesday evenings?
They're Wednesday evenings.
Wednesday evenings, so 7 o'clock Wednesday evenings for
90-minute sessions, isn't it?
No,
so,
1.5 hours. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, then comment or direct message. And below this thing, we'll make sure there's a link to all the sign-ups for the webinar are through Sorrel's webpage. So there'll be a link to Sorrel's webpage for anyone who's interested to sign up. I'd love to see people there.
Yeah, well, we already have about 10 people signed up.
Oh, so, brilliant.
Yeah, I'm really pleased about that.
Well, it's going to be a sellout. Free, but a free is allowed.
Well, there's an upper limit of 100 on a Zoom call at the moment for me, because
Okay.
I think 100 is enough. So I think unless there's anything more we want to add, we've probably...
I think that's enough.
Yeah, let's wrap this up, shall we?
Yeah.
Well, I hope to see lots of people next week, next Tuesday. And thank you for listening if you have been.
Take care.
So, bye.
Bye.
I've stopped streaming.
Hallelujah. That was good.
No, I'm going to turn off the recording as well.